on behalf of the audience.
Okay.
The later part.
And when I will be presenting, I won't see the chat and won't see the screen. So if there's anything, just interrupt me. That's fine.
Yeah, sure.
Your mic and just let me know. Otherwise, I wouldn't notice anything. Right?
Yes, definitely.
Please begin. You are live now.
Okay, Aaron, if you could please stop sharing your screen right now, because yeah.
Stop sharing. Okay.
Yes, right now. Yes, and I'll ask you to do it again. Okay. Fine. So we are live now. Okay. So good evening, everybody. Let me introduce you to the speaker of this day. We have Mr. Aaron, who has been an entrepreneur in the biotech and education sector for the last 20 years. After having worked in the semiconductor industry for the few years, Aaron has become co-founder of Epigenomics, a German US-based biotech company specialized in cancer diagnostics. Later, after the IPO of the company, Mr. Aaron became increasingly interested in the field of education. He helped build up a chain of private schools in Germany and has been a co-owner and a board member of a language school operator in Switzerland, and is the owner of Daycare Center. Apart from his own entrepreneurial activity, Aaron occasionally supports promising Swiss startup companies as a small business angel and has been involved in 14 startup companies so far. He is also active as a business coach at different events and organizations, and is a lecturer in strategic management and entrepreneurship at the Bern University of Applied Sciences. Aaron has a degree in electrical engineering from ETH and is a certified financial analyst. So Aaron, it is really glad to have you on with us on platform, and I'm very much sure our audience is very enthusiastic to listen from you, and hope to have a very good engaging session with the audience. So I welcome you on behalf of entire university on this platform to share your views on customer-centered business creation and approach to startup success. Aaron, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jay. Thanks a lot for this nice introduction. I'm very pleased and very excited to be with you. You know, I have been at Parul University physically already twice, and we wanted to come this year as well for a special course, but due to this Corona issue, we couldn't come. So I'm pleased to be in touch with you, at least, you know, through this channel.
Yeah. So, Aaron, one more point I would like to put to my audience, but I request audience to please post your queries over email at edc@paruluniversity.ac.in. So I repeat, I request all the audience to post your queries over email to us at edc@paruluniversity.ac.in, and we will try to address your queries at the later part of the session today, at the end part of the session. Thank you. Yes, Ivan, over to you.
Yeah, so normally I would actually like to have it interactively, people just interrupting with their questions, but with a webinar format that doesn't work. So I will do some talking, and hopefully we will collect some of your questions, and then we'll come back to the questions. Now let me share my screen with you.
Yes, it's visible now.
So can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it. Please.
Okay, excellent. So I would like to, and we agreed with Jay that I would say something about customer-centered business creation. I won't do, you know, a lecture on any specific method, and I'm sure all of you have heard about various methods like design thinking and lean startup and other things. But I would just like to, from my personal point of view as an entrepreneur, I would like to emphasize certain points and try to show you why certain points are so important, and you know, how certain things can go wrong. So this is me, and Jay has already basically introduced me. I live in Switzerland, But I spent quite a lot of time in Germany, where I started my first company together with colleagues. And I'm quite an international person. I've been living in different countries. And originally, I'm an engineer, but I have completely turned into a business person. I don't define myself as an engineer anymore, but I used to be one. And it was an interesting transition from being an engineer to becoming a business person. It's a different mindset, and I kind of know both, which is quite interesting. This shows my startup portfolio. So those are companies with which and it's all startup companies, with which I have been involved in one way or the other. And I think this is quite typical for many entrepreneurs, and that's the cool thing about becoming an entrepreneur. You know, maybe you start one company and then a whole universe of entrepreneurship opens up, and you end up being involved with many different things. And I think some of you or many of you will experience that in the future, and that's really exciting. So on the left-hand side, you see the companies which I have actively built up, founded or co-founded, my own companies. On the right-hand side, you see companies which are not my companies in the sense, but which I started to support after a while with some money, some seed money, and with, advice, sometimes being on their board. And very typically, there are less companies on the left-hand side than on the right-hand side because, building up a company yourself, that takes years of intensive work, so you cannot do so much of that. But supporting other companies, that doesn't take so much time. You can do several in parallel. So Jay mentioned my first company, that was the biotech company, focusing on cancer diagnostics. So we have one product out in the market, which is a screening product for colon cancer, screening from blood, which is a new thing. And then you see the chain of schools, again in Germany, which I entered. And actually, how did I get from technology to education? I think that's also quite typical. Sometimes there's just coincidences. And the story was, I started to become a business angel, meaning investing into other startup companies. And one of these investments was into a new chain of private schools called Forms. And I never thought of actively working in that company. I just thought, okay, I give them some advice and that's all. But they were so successful because they really hit a big need in the market. So they were growing very quickly, opening new schools. And then, which is very typical, they ran into problems, into operational problems. And I started to help out more and more. And at the end, I was part of the executive board. And there I discovered the world of education. I found that education is equally fundamental and important as health. Coming from healthcare, going to education. So since then, I've been involved in education. Allegra, that's this chain of language schools that's now in Switzerland, which we sold because we got an offer from a company, and my colleagues, they couldn't resist the offer. I would have liked to keep it, but now we sold it. And this Zimbalo, that's a daycare operator, so for the very small kids. And I'm still active on that one. And then you have on the right-hand side all kinds of companies from different industries: tourism, technology, biotech, fintech, virtual reality, this one, anchors, all kinds of things. And I will maybe come back to some examples from one or the other company. So I mentioned that there's a lot of books and theories, and I will occasionally relate to some concepts from one or the other book, but I won't, teach you any of these books because I'm sure all of you have already heard a lot of theory and probably know one or the other book. Maybe you have read these books or other books, and you have maybe done workshops and learned methods, design thinking methods and other methods. So I would rather, have a practitioner perspective on this series. All these books and methods are very useful, but typically, if you're really doing things, you don't just stick to one recipe book. I mean, which one would be the right recipe book? There's so many different books. So you read all these books and somehow you pick out those things which you find useful and you integrate concepts. And that's, I think, how it happens in reality. But all these books are great. You know, there's some basic theory books, and then you have some kind of recipe books, often developed in companies which you might not know, but which you might, look up. The Field Guide to Human-Centered Design, it's a very good one. It's a step-by-step approach to human-centered design. Kick book, very similar idea. This book here, The Business Model Navigator, you probably don't know. It's a Swiss book, but it's great because it shows you 55 types of business models with examples. So if you wonder, okay, what variations of business models are possible, this will inspire you with a lot of different ways how you can make a business. As an intro, I thought I show something more entertaining and funny. Some years ago, I had a talk in front of engineers, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the engineer's mindset and the business people's mindset, and what the typical problems with the engineer's mindset are if it comes to business. So I was looking for some funny pictures showing essentially products which no one knows, because someone has invented them, but they did never reach the market or become successful. So this is not fully serious, and examples are very extreme. So typically you will see, okay, what a stupid idea. But this represents fundamental problems which I see every day, which are just more subtle. It's not so obvious, but the same type of problems. And I found, originally I thought these problems you have only with engineers, that engineers have a very special mindset. But actually I discovered that scientists, you have the same issue with scientists, and even you have the same issue with business people, And the issue is that all of these people are focused typically too much on the solution, too much on the product or the service, and not enough on the customer. So that's a very general thing. So let me show you some of these pictures. And before I show you the pictures, let me just show you this chart. Statistics on the top 10 reasons why startups fail. Honestly, I'm not sure whether it's real statistics. I tried to find the source. I tried to find, the date on which this is based, and actually I didn't find it. So maybe this is made up. I don't know. But from a practitioner's point of view, at least it feels right. And the important thing I want to point out here, the big number one reason why most startups fail is because they have been building something which nobody wants. And then there are some other reasons, many to do with people. That's the other really critical ingredient of a startup company. People you hire or other members of the team. But number one, we will talk about number one. So let me show you some of these pictures. This is an invention, obviously, for Asia, where you have these noodle soups, and it's always very hot. You burn your mouth. So that's a real problem. I think everyone who has eaten a soup knows the problem. And they have come up with a great solution. But the question is it really that great? And probably not, because I've never seen it anywhere. So you might wonder, okay, what's the issue? And I'm not quite sure, but maybe the problem isn't that big, or maybe the solution isn't really a good one. But somehow this is one of many, many inventions, many innovative products which didn't end up having traction in the world. Something similar, the noodles fall back to the soup, it creates a mess. This is a nice way to protect your hair, but you can maybe guess what the issue here is. It doesn't look very good. Who wants to put on such a thing in a restaurant? So somehow, this happens if you don't really understand your customers very well. You kind of understand the problem, but you don't understand all facets, all aspects of the customer. And Even if this solves part of the problem, it's not a good solution. This light cigarettes. Great thing is you don't need gas, you don't need anything, you don't need to refill your lighter. Wonderful thing. Why is no one using it? You might wonder. Probably the problem they try to solve, that you need to replace your lighter or fill it up with gas. Maybe it's not a real problem. There's no point in solving it. You always, people in civilization always have access to fire without having to go to this big solution. I like this one a lot. Everyone who has been wearing shoes like that, stilettos like that, knows the problem. If you step into a small gap, things can become very nasty. In the worst case, the shoe breaks, and or you fall and hurt yourself, or even if you don't fall, you make some movements which are not very elegant. It doesn't look good. So I've never worn such shoes, but I know from ladies, that this is a real problem. I think everyone who has been walking in such shoes knows that. And some engineers have found a really great solution, and the solution works. It stops this problem. So you would think this is a great solution, but of course, obviously, there's an issue with this solution, right? And the issue, of course, is that it doesn't look good. And the only reason why you wear these shoes is to look good. So somehow, even if it solves the problem with the shoe being stuck in the gap, if you don't understand the full person with all their other needs around it, you get your solution wrong. So this is, of course, an obvious problem. Everyone sees that and laughs about it. But in real life, you see this type of problem very often. It's just more subtle and it's not so obvious. This is an old one, when the roads were not very good yet, but you already had these telegraph wires or electricity wires. Someone invented this nice bicycle which allows you to travel very quickly. It never became reality. You might wonder why. And I think it's quite obvious why. This is another example, also an old. This is something like a motorbike, I think, with one wheel. Actually, it looks really cool. I would like to see one of these and try one of these. But for some reason, it never reached the market. People seem not to have been keen on it. And I don't know what the reason is. Maybe it's just not better than a normal motorbike. Maybe it's dangerous. Maybe you have technical issues. This is one of many, many products and businesses which never became reality. This is something, in the US and also in Europe, people have a lot of pets at home, little dogs. And when you go walking, someone thought, okay, this is a great idea, how you can take your little dog with you. Again, that's something I've never seen, and you can speculate why. Probably, again, there's a problem understanding the needs of the owner of the dog and maybe also of the dog. So maybe this is just very unpleasant for the dog. Maybe, no one would want to walk around like that because it looks really silly. And actually, maybe there isn't even a problem because most dogs have legs and they can walk and even have to walk themselves. But, nice try. Now, this is another type of problem. Here, we all know ATMs, they meet a real need and, they work perfectly. It's a great solution, wonderful thing. But this shows, that it's not just enough to have a great solution for a really important need, but you need to get all the other elements right. And there are many more elements, where you install it, how you install it, what your customer service is, and so on. So if you get any of these details wrong, this thing stops being useful. And here, obviously, there is an issue with how they fixed it to the wall, obviously. Same thing here. Urinals are a useful thing, used everywhere in the world, great invention. But if you don't get the installation right, if you don't get all the aspects right, it starts to be a problem. This is yet another type of problem. I mean, it's not a problem. We all know that notebooks are a great business, and that certainly works. But this just shows a problem which often occurs, which can really kill a good idea. It's when customers actually start using your product in an unexpected way, not in the way you thought they would be using it. So this guy definitely doesn't use his notebook as the engineers who built the notebook thought, because typically you think you sit at a desk or you sit in a chair and have this thing in your lap. And certainly if this was a typical way to use a notebook, which I guess it isn't, then very certainly the notebook would look different. You would design a notebook differently. Now here the notebook works because this is not a typical case. This guy is an exception, is an outlier, and it doesn't matter. But sometimes certain products meet that problem and most people use it in the wrong way, which means not that your customers are wrong, but it means you got your product wrong, and then maybe your product doesn't work very well. This is the same idea. This guy found a different use for his notebook, which is great. But if many people did that, and if you knew that your customers do this, you would certainly build your product differently. Because, if he does this every day, I think it won't survive for very long, and it would be a bad product. So this is just this little series of ways how you can get your product wrong by somehow missing the market, somehow missing the customer. And we all smile about this. It's very obvious. We think, okay, I won't be that stupid. But I'm sure many of you will, when you have worked hard on a value proposition, on a product, on a service, will run into the very same type of problem, just in a less obvious way. And interestingly, I'm also a coach, and then I'm sitting in juries. So for example, I'm in the jury of the Business Angel Club Switzerland. So every month I read like 30 business propositions. And I see a lot of business cases, and also as a business angel and so on. And mostly people who present such business cases, they have been thinking and reading about, starting a business. They have been in seminars, they have been in lectures, they have read books. They know all this. They know that it's so hard and so important to understand the customer. They know all the methods. They know design thinking. They apply these methods. But still, when you read their business plan, when you read their value proposition in many, many cases, you somehow feel, somehow there's an issue with this value proposition. I'm not sure they have really fully understood the customer needs, or I'm not sure, their product is really matching the problem they try to address. So somehow knowing about this, having read about this, having trained this, applying these methods seems not to be sufficient to get it right. And that's why I assume that also you guys will run into that problem. And of course, I say that not to discourage you, not to frustrate you, but actually to help you to see the enemy. So the enemy seems to be an attitude which is very hard to overcome with knowledge, with methods. And if you're aware of that, if you start to be aware of that these funny problems, which we're all laughing about, will probably also occur to you, just in a more subtle, in a more less obvious way, then maybe it helps you to work harder on avoiding the problem in the first place. So what not only engineers, but really almost all people who start thinking about business have to learn and get used to is to get away from focusing too much on the solution, on the product, on the service, on what you offer to the customers. And that's, this slide shows how most people who start doing business, how they think. They think a lot about their product, a lot about their service, a lot about how they do it. Of course, they also think about customers. They know that customers are important, but still, if you talk to them, you realize that most of the talking is not about the customers. It's about their product. The focus is very much on the product, even if they know that they should focus on the customers, even if they try to do so unconsciously. The focus sticks on the product, on the technology, all these things. And in this mindset, the customer is something peripheral, and sometimes it's not customers, but partners, if you need other companies to work together with. So you spend 80% of your energy thinking about the product, and then you think, okay, we have now a wonderful product, it's perfect, and now the only thing we have to do is to sell it. And if you're an engineer, then maybe you think, okay, selling, that's not my thing. I find a company which is good at selling, and they sell it for me. And the problem is, this almost never works. Starting from your product, focusing on the product, and considering everything else as peripheral is just not giving you good results. So, what you should end up, and I think it takes some experience and maybe also some failures, is to have the true attitude to put the customers into the center and to think and talk mostly about the customers. And consider your solution as a peripheral thing, just a possible thing how to make your customers happy. And you need to adapt your solution to the customers. And you think all the time about the customers. You talk a lot to the customers. You observe the customers. You interact with them. And based on that, then you, of course, come up with a good product for them. And by the way, not only great product, but you adapt every aspect of your business, your distribution channels, your way how you market it, your customer service, everything. And the center of your attention is the customer. That's the ideal. And that's what is and seems to be so counterintuitive. I think there are strong psychological reasons why people have such a difficulty to not only know that they should do this, but to really embrace this attitude and to really live like that and not to fall back into this. And probably one reason is that, of course, when you build your business, what you have to do is mostly to work on your solution because it's not there and you are the person who creates the solution. So that takes a lot of attention and time, of course. Whereas the customers are there, you don't have to create the customers, And then for that reason, often you underestimate the effort it takes to really understand the customer. People are too confident, and that even happens to people who have experience, who have successfully started up companies. It happens to me, it happens to other entrepreneurs, that just intuitively, unconsciously, even if that's not how they talk, and even if they know it's wrong, what they actually do is this. And not enough of this. So the question is, how can you get to this if it's so hard to get into that state of mind? And this is, I think, a good moment to talk a little bit about this term value proposition. Because all this is about is the value proposition. Let me show you this chart, and probably many of you know this. This is the business model canvas, one of the powerful tools which people use when they develop a new business. So basically, this is 9 elements of a business. Basically, the idea is that the business is much more than a product, right? So to have a successful business, you have to come up with a wonderful product addressing a real need of real people. But you need to get other things right as well. You need to get the right channels. You need to find out what is the best way how this product or service gets to the customer. You need to find out how to do it internally. What will be the key activities so that you get it right? What are the things you do yourself? What are the things you outsource? What are the things you need to have? What people do you need to have? What know-how? What machines? What facilities? And also, how can external companies, partners help you? How do you generate revenue? What's your revenue structure, revenue method? And what's your cost? Of course, that's linked to these other fields. So this is a useful tool, a very powerful tool. It's very useful for developing or optimizing your business. So if you have a business, and maybe it's a running business, but you wonder how can we make it better, you can sit together. It's a wonderful tool for teamwork. You sit together in front of that canvas, it's visual, and then typically using Post-its or something, you just try to change things, and then to see, okay, if we change something here in the channel, what impact does that have on our activities and resources and partners, and how does it change the value proposition? And it's a great development tool, and you stay on the top level, and that's how you do it. By the way, many people use that also for communicating their business idea to others who don't know about the business idea. And to be honest, personally, I'm not so enthusiastic about it. Many people have tried to explain their business idea to me, showing their business model canvas with a lot of text in it. And personally, I don't find it very nice and useful and easy to understand, because the best way to get the business idea across is to tell a story. Maybe you start with the problem, or you start how you found the problem, or you start with whatever, or with the customer. But the story has a beginning, has a logic, has a build-up, has an end. And the canvas doesn't have all this. If you show me your canvas, I can start to look at it everywhere. No one tells me where the story starts. No one tells me where the important and critical and beautiful and special things are. And probably I will start at the left bottom and then try to understand what this is all about. So I think it's great for a team to work together, which is deep into the topic. And if you want to present your idea to someone who doesn't know anything about it, I don't think it's very powerful. But there are other people who handle it differently. It's just my opinion. Okay, the point I want to make. There are two fields in this canvas which are very fundamental, which you have to think about first. And that's this thing called value proposition and the customer segments. And, these are really linked together very closely. You cannot think about the value proposition without at the same time thinking about customer segments and customers. And it doesn't make sense, or you don't get very far when you start thinking about customers without thinking about some of the aspects of the value proposition. And let me give you some more detail what value proposition really means. Value proposition really includes 4 elements. And one of the 4 elements is actually the customer segments. So I also count the customer segments in a broader sense into this concept of value proposition. So if you want to have a clear idea and good idea of a real value proposition, you need to have a very clear and very precise idea of your target customer groups, who they are and how they are like. And that means, that leads us directly to the next thing. You can only think and understand your customer groups if you understand their needs or problems or pains or gains. That's synonyms. It's all about the same thing. Some people, it's very fashionable nowadays to talk about pain points. I prefer the term needs or sometimes problems, but needs is better because not every need is a pain. If you are a successful ice cream company, I don't think it's about the pain, but it's about the need or gain. Anyway, so these two things are closely interlinked with each other. You cannot think about one without thinking about the other. Sometimes people say you have to find the really important need. That's true, but actually, you don't have to find the need. That's very abstract. A need is nothing without people having it, right? So when you think about the need, actually, you have to think about people. And if you just try to think of a need and don't think of people, probably it's too abstract, and the likelihood of you getting something wrong is very high. So customer or customer groups is one element. Their needs or problems or dreams or whatever is another element. The third element is then, of course, your solution, addressing some of these needs of a well-defined target group. And here you see the word perfectly. It's very important. You know, most businesses fail because they don't get this perfectly right. And maybe perfectly is a bit exaggerated, but just having a solution for a well-understood need, that's not enough. And sometimes even having a good solution is not enough. You should try to find the perfect solution, which addresses, and that's another thing, you know, the right needs, not all needs. People have hundreds of needs in a certain situation. If you try to satisfy them all, you will be lost. But the right ones, you shouldn't miss any of them, any of the important ones. And the fourth element of the value proposition is whatever your solution is, it must be unique. If it's not unique, if it's like anything, you know, if it's like something else which already exists, you don't have a business. So having a unique, a USP, a competitive advantage, that's not a nice to have, but it's a must. And being unique is not enough. You must be unique in a relevant way. So that's another problem which I often see, that people have identified a real problem and they know who has the problem and they have come up with a very good solution. And it's even unique, but it's not unique in a relevant way. Again, that's something which happens quite often with engineers. They apply a new technology to solve a certain problem, and they say, we have the first product which uses this or that technology to do the job. And the typical test answer here is, so what? And if you don't have a very strong answer to the so what, then maybe your uniqueness is not so important. So unique and relevant. So those are the four elements of a value proposition. And you see, you need to get four different things right. It's very hard. You need to get the customer groups right. You need to understand their needs very well. You need to have a solution which perfectly addresses a good selection, the right selection of needs which you want to address. And after all these things, which are very hard to achieve together, also it must be unique. Very, very hard. An important thing here, it's not the fifth element, it's just something you have to bear in mind. You know, having a clear value proposition also includes knowing very well what you don't want to be. So you only have a good value proposition if you know exactly what customer groups you don't want to address. Doesn't mean that you don't sell if they buy, but you don't try hard to make certain customer groups happy. You have to really identify some of the customer groups and forget about the others. And if you try to address too many of their needs, you will fail because it will be too hard. Coming up with a product or a service which satisfies so many different needs, that will be just overdetermined, and you will have too many compromises to make, and you will end up maybe not getting any of their needs right. So knowing what you don't want to be, and also, you know, knowing how you don't want to differ. You should differ in at least one aspect, but you don't have to differ in many aspects from the competitors. If you differ in one relevant aspect, that can be absolutely enough. So this is important and difficult because intuitively people don't easily decide not to do something. You know, you don't want to miss an opportunity. You don't want to miss any customer groups. Ideally, you would want all customer groups being your customers. But if you try to do that, you will fail because it's too hard. So it's counterintuitive to focus only on one or two customer groups and to forget about all the others. Intuitively, you would not want to do that. And intuitively, you would want to satisfy all their needs, which is great, but it's just hard to do. And if you try to go for too many needs, you won't have a good solution. So you will have to limit yourself to the right needs. If you limit yourself too much, think of the lady's shoe, then you get it wrong again. So that's very hard. And all these aspects are basically hidden in this box called value proposition plus this box. And, experienced people have this always in mind. They know that value proposition is also about needs, and it's about the solution, and it's about uniqueness. All these different aspects are hidden there, but often people starting a business, they forget about it. That's why some people have come up with this alternative way, and probably have seen it, or maybe that's the preferred canvas you're using. I'm not sure. It's a lean canvas. It's basically taking the business model canvas, but replacing some boxes by other boxes. And here you see all these elements are separately visible as separate boxes. So here you have the problem or the need. Here you have also as a sub-aspect existing alternatives, which really forces you to think about uniqueness. Here again, you have the customer segments. That's the same. You have your solution. So the problem of the customers and your solution. And here you have this aspect, what is so unique about your solution and why the people need your solution and are not happy enough with the existing solutions. So I would say if you're experienced and if you are working on a more mature business, the business model canvas is probably preferable because it has more relevant aspects which are visible. But if you are more a beginning, or if you are, a techie, a classic one like I have been, then this is the better tool because it helps you to really remember to always think about the problem and always try to find out whether your solution is the right one and not forget about the need to be unique. And finding a viable value proposition, getting those four elements right, that everything is right, is hard. It's really hard. And the good news is finding a viable value proposition is hard work, which means you can't do something about it. You need to work hard on it, and then you can find it. So it's not just a question of luck. I mean, luck plays a role, but you can solve this by hard work. And what I just experienced is that people starting doing business, they underestimate how hard this really is. They are too confident. They are too happy too early. And they underestimate the amount of work which has to go into it, also the amount of time until you end up finding a really good value proposition. And you need a really good value proposition to have a good basis for a business, and still you need to figure out all the other elements. So how does the work happen? What does it mean, work? You probably all know this iterative concept. That's basically what work means. It means that you start with a business idea. You have an idea of certain people having certain needs, and you have an idea of a solution, and you think it might be quite good. But if you're experienced, you know that probably you got it wrong. You got probably many things wrong. Probably you got things wrong in all four elements. But you try to get it as good as possible, and you start with the hypothesis, so you have a certain idea what your business might be. But you know that probably a dozen or 2 dozen things are wrong, and you don't know yet about it. So you actually realize, your value proposition includes a lot of hypotheses. And because you want to progress, you try to find out how you can test your hypothesis. You first need to identify them. That's sometimes not so easy. Sometimes you take something as granted and you think it's a fact. But actually, if you think carefully about it, you will realize it's only a hypothesis and you cannot be so sure. You just believe because it sounds so plausible, or you have talked to 3 customers and they've told you something, so you think that's how customers think. But maybe the 3 customers were not typical, or you didn't understand what they were saying. So you design experiments for testing your hypothesis. And typically when you do that, you will find maybe some of your hypotheses were right, and then you're very happy, but typically most of your hypotheses are wrong. And so you learn something from doing the test, and then you use that to change your hypothesis. You change your value proposition, and you do it many, many times iteratively. And that's what we call progress, right? So that's the hard work. Hard work means not sticking to your first hypothesis and just working hard in developing the final product, but it's trying to find out what you got wrong before you have your final product on the market. So design experiments, I'm not going into that. I'm sure you know these methods, lean startup and others, and also you have the same idea in design thinking. But it can be talking to people, it can be showing them mock-ups or showing them prototypes, giving them minimum viable products, giving them prototypes, see how they react, selling them something which you don't have yet, all these things. And this is a procedure which you apply for the whole business model, for all the 9 elements from the business model canvas. But of course, it's the same process which initially you apply for just getting your value proposition right. Just those 4 elements hidden in that one box of the business model canvas. So this is what I mean by hard work. Of course, the art is to make it as quick as possible, to make every iteration as cheap as possible. So don't build a full product and then just show it to the customers to find out that this is not what they want, but try to do something small, lean, incomplete, but still meaningful. So that's the hard work. And now I want to emphasize one important aspect here. Time. Time is very precious, and speed matters. And why is that? If you think, what is a failed startup company? A failed startup company is not a company who has a value proposition which is not good. Because very honestly, every startup company starts with a value proposition which doesn't really work. I have never in my life I've seen a startup company, sending me a business plan where the value proposition was perfect from the very beginning. Maybe it looked perfect. Maybe you read it and thought, wow, that looks perfect. But at the end, it turned out not to be perfect. So, every startup company starts with a bad value proposition. That's normal. So what's the difference then between a successful and a failed startup company? I think it's just, every startup company starts going through these iterations, and step by step they improve their value proposition. They get rid of more and more false hypotheses. They find more and more alternatives where more and more elements start to be right. And the failures are basically those who stop before they reach a really good value proposition. The successful startup companies are those who reach, it's just the other way around, who reach a really great value proposition and at the end also great business model before they give up. So basically, it's just a question of how long you try. And how can you become successful? Now, of course, there are different ways. One way would be, start with a business idea initially, which of course is wrong, but not that wrong. So maybe, 5 or 10 iterations will actually lead you to a really good thing. Don't start with one which takes 50 iterations, because that's just a long way. And before you reach the 50 iterations, when you have found your perfect solution, maybe you have given up because, after 10 iterations, you're just so tired and fed up and frustrated, or you run out of money. So certainly having a good starting point, not to have a completely crazy, completely bad value proposition idea, that helps. The other thing which of course helps is endurance. So, if you give up after the first iteration round and you're very frustrated that it seems not to be good, and then think, okay, now I failed, you will probably never reach a successful value proposition. So you need a certain grit, a certain tolerance to frustration, and just go on. But I'm not saying you should never give up, because sometimes giving up is a good choice. And sometimes you see people, and it's very tragic, who stick desperately to their vision and try, and they are very unhappy, and they have been trying for 10 years. So sometimes stopping is a good thing. Of course, the difficult thing is, what's the right moment to stop? Maybe, when you stop, maybe it would have only taken you 2 more iterations and you would have found the right solution. And then it's foolish to stop. So, the difference between a fool and a very persistent person, a hero, is sometimes just luck, I would say. So you can, by trying many times, you can increase your likelihood of success by starting already at a decent level of error helps, because you don't have to do so many iterations. And there's a third thing which helps, and that's what I want to emphasize, and that's maybe the most powerful thing you can do, is you can try to speed this process up. The longer one iteration it takes you, the longer it will take you to have gone through 15 iterations. And the longer it takes, the more likely you are to give up before you have reached your final perfect solution. So being very quick, having this cycle in a week's basis or something, that helps, because in the same time you can do much more iterations, you can make much more progress, and you're much more likely that you find the perfect solution before you're too tired to continue. And how can you speed up this process? I think, all these methods which you read in the book, they help you. If you stick to this recipe, and if you try to make these things simple and fast and cheap, that helps you. But what is really driving this speed up is a certain attitude. The basic force, the engine of speeding this process up, is an attitude. And the attitude is the one of doubt. It's doubt which helps speeding up your progress. I mean, you can apply all these methods, but without having the right attitude, without having doubt, it won't help you a lot. Doubt is the driving force here. So doubt is your friend. Overconfidence is your enemy. Because overconfidence means with the first set of hypotheses, you're convinced that you found the right thing, and you don't try to get into your first iteration. You will at the end, of course, go through the iteration, but only much later, when you realize, to your great surprise, that your value proposition actually isn't so great. So doubt is pushing you forward, because okay, it looks so great, but I know it's wrong, and I want to find out what is wrong about it, and I want to find it now because I want to fix it. That's what doubt does. So here are some useful questions of the doubtful people, which can really accompany you. Can we really be sure? How do we know? That's a very powerful question. Whenever you're convinced that you understand your customer, ask yourself critically, how do we really know? What are we missing? If you have a perfect business model and everything is so clear and everything is perfect, you should be very suspicious. And you should wonder, oh God, it looks too good. What are we missing? We must be missing something. What are our unproven hypotheses? How can we find out as soon as possible? That's the questions. And now maybe you might wonder, wait a minute, why is he talking about doubt? I mean, everyone is talking about confidence. As an entrepreneur, you must be confident. That's the difference between an entrepreneur and other people, the confidence. They really believe in their vision, and they have so much confidence, and that's true. So let's talk a little bit about confidence. I think we need to get that really straightened out. It's a bit more complicated than that. There are two types of confidence. And one is good and you need it, otherwise you're not an entrepreneur. And the other one is bad and will result in failure. If it's about your value proposition and your business model, your current understanding of your business, confidence is bad. Doubt is your friend. You should be very nervous, even if it looks great, and wonder, okay, what did I get wrong? What's the things we don't understand yet? What's the hypothesis which probably are wrong? And this will help you to go forward and speed up your iteration machine. But you should at the same time be very confident about the goal, that it's worth going for the goal. And you should also be very confident about the journey. You should be confident that eventually, after a lot of work, you will be able to figure it out. You should never give up, the confidence in you at the end sorting it out. But it's not the same thing as foolishly believing that your value proposition is great, even if it's not proven. So some of the most impressive entrepreneurs I've met are people who express this doubt very clearly all the time. When we had this private school, we went to visit a private school chain in Sweden. They were our benchmark. They had 100 schools, super successful. They had a standardized system. We wanted to learn how they do it. So we called them up, and the first great thing was they said, oh yes, come. We always like to exchange our thoughts. We would like to learn from you. Although you're 100 times smaller, and we're sure we can learn from you. So that was already a great attitude. And then we had the presentation from the CEO, and the whole presentation was about things they tried, things which went wrong, things they had to fix. And even when he came to the present, which was very successful, and he presented their strategy forward, he said, we're not really sure that this is right, and we will try and we'll see, and we're nervous about it. So a lot of doubt, but at the same time, he was very confident, because someone who is so open about the failures and the problems and doubts, but still goes for it, must be a very confident and optimistic person. So that's my input about the doubt. Doubt and confidence, they go together if you apply them on the right thing. If you apply your confidence on the wrong thing, you're not an optimist, you're not an entrepreneur, but you're just a fool. The problem is, if you stick too long to your hypothesis, if you don't find problems with it, if you don't change it often enough, you invest more and more time into a wrong value proposition, and psychologically it will become very hard to acknowledge that maybe you have to change something. So psychologically, not changing your ideas very frequently can become a problem. So it's very hard, and you need to explore your customers. Of course, you know that. The question is, how do you do it? And here again, this is my list of the 4 elements of a value proposition. So let's start with the customer group. This is an example from my biotech company, and I just try to show you how hard it is to find the right customer group. Much harder than you would think. And I want to sensitize you to not take this too lightly. So we were a biotech company, and we decided that we want to develop screening products for cancer. So that means, tests which apply on healthy people who feel healthy to find the cancer at the early stage. Because if you find the cancer at the early stage, often you can easily cure it by surgery. If you find the cancer at the later stage, when you start to feel it, then often it's too late. And that's certainly the case with lung cancer. So the first product we started developing was a screening test for colon cancer. Great product. And then we thought, okay, lung cancer is also a big thing. We have an unmet medical need because a lot of people who realize they have lung cancer, they realize it at the point when it's too late and you cannot really cure it anymore. Because it develops silently and there are no good screening methods which are cheap enough and reliable enough, which help you looking at a healthy person and discover an early stage of cancer. So we started developing a test from blood for which you apply on healthy people and which would pick out a few people who develop an early stage of that cancer so that you can treat them and the problem is fixed. And we thought it's a great idea. And we worked on that quite a lot. We worked with doctors and we worked with, experts. And after quite some while, we realized, oh gosh, we have a problem. And the problem was that, in order for a screening test to work, at least in Europe, that's the case, you need insurance companies covering the test. And the insurance companies are very reluctant paying for tests for healthy people because that means, you have to pay the test for everyone. That's a lot of tests. That's a lot of money. So insurance companies only like to pay for a test if economically it makes sense for them. In the case of colon cancer, it did because, there are quite a lot of cases of colon cancer and treating a colon cancer takes a long time and it's expensive. So actually by paying for a test on many, many healthy people, which is a lot of money, they can save even more costs, treatment costs, which come later. So health economically, it makes sense. And we figured out that it's different for for lung cancer. It's not the same thing because there are much less cases of lung cancer, fortunately. And that just means that the screening costs still a lot of money, but actually you save much less money because there are much less cases which would then have this expensive treatment costs. So we found out that probably insurance companies would never pay for that test. And if insurance companies don't pay for that test, this won't be a success because patients are not willing to pay the test for themselves. So we realized we have a problem, and we solved the problem by saying, okay, let's develop a test which is not aiming at everyone without symptoms, but which is just aiming at the risk group, and the risk group are smokers. We thought this is a very clever idea. We developed a test specifically for smokers who are not sick, because there, of course, much more people will have the cancer, and there the health economics will work out. It's much less tests which the insurance companies have to pay, and much more cases where they save the expensive treatment costs by finding the disease early. And we discussed that with insurance companies, and they said, yes, if the test is targeted like that, then that's probably something we would be willing to pay. We will seriously think about that. That's interesting. We're excited about that. So we spent another, a lot of time working on a test like that, and that's kind of a different procedure because the clinical trials, everything is different. And it took us many, many months until we figured out that also with that changed target group, we have a problem. And I think it was 1 year after we started when we found out that. Because what we found out after a while is that there's a problem with the smokers. Smokers, of course, they know that smoking is very bad and that they have a much higher chance of getting lung cancer. And this mental dissonance they have to solve. So smokers are very good at somehow pushing away this problem. They don't want to hear about disease. They don't want to think of their risk. Or some, they make up this story like, well, I know my nature is so strong, I will never get cancer because I'm so healthy. So they have some way, but they're not keen in taking a test and, finding maybe out that they have something. It's not very rational. But we found that out when talking to smokers. We found that out when we talked to people who treat smokers a lot. And we figured out, yes, insurance companies would pay it, but the patient, the target group, the risk group would not, most of them would not want to use the test. So again, we found out with this modified target group, it still doesn't work. So we changed it again. We came up with a third type of target group, and we said, okay, probably we have to go to the people who have already been diagnosed lung cancer. And we develop a completely different test, which helps the doctors to decide which type of lung cancer it is and find the optimum treatment. Of course, that's less attractive. The market has become much smaller now, from everyone to just the smokers to just the people who have lung cancer. It's less and less people. But for such a test, you can ask more money because it has an obvious value, and health insurance companies are very keen on that. So that's how this product ended up, and it got a much lower priority in the pipeline because, it's not a blockbuster anymore. And it took us more than a year to find this out, and we were not stupid, and we were working very hard on it, and we were talking to a lot of people. But I would say in hindsight, we were too confident with our first idea of the customer group. We were too confident with the second idea. And had we been more doubtful, if we had more doubt and less confidence, and had we be thinking, okay, it looks so great, but probably it's wrong, where's the mistake? I think we would have found the problems earlier, and we would have spent less time and less money on finding this out. So doubt would have been very helpful, but we were young and we were overconfident about our idea, and it took us a long time. You might know the concept. Let me maybe skip this because I need to watch the time a little bit. Have a deep understanding of their exact needs. So if you talk about customers, of course, you have to think about their needs. This is a popular thing in design thinking, I believe. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So, going back to the problem, finding a great problem, that's already a great starting point for a great entrepreneurial success. Investing a lot of time finding a solution for a problem which is not a real problem is a recipe for failure. And of course, as I said, thinking about the problem actually means thinking about people. There are no problems independent of people. So you have to think about people. And, if you don't get the needs right, you end up having something like that. And you probably know this canvas. You should really have a look at that. It's from the Value Proposition Design book, which really tries to show you what it means. This is the right-hand side is understanding your customer. This little guy is the customer who is in a certain situation in his life, needs to get some jobs done, has hopes and problems. And your task is to develop the right solution, and it should be a perfect match. So your solution should match the job they have to do, and it should have properties which create gains and which relieve pains, right? So let's just focus on the customer side. Actually, this picture is not very powerful, but what comes with it, if you read the book, you have this long list of trigger questions, and they are fantastic. They're very helpful. So if you think you have understood your customer, go back to the book, look at these many trigger questions, and honestly try to answer the question, can I answer this question, or are there things which I don't know yet? So this tool helps you to fight your overconfidence, to get you back to the ground, and to just give you a hint of what all the things are which you really need to understand about your customers. And it's a lot of things. And it's not, you cannot find out these things very quickly. It takes a long time. If you have identified needs, then a very important thing is to prioritize the needs. Not every pain is equally strong. Not every gain, not every hope is equally strong. And a problem which I see very often is if companies address needs which are there, they are right, they have identified needs, but there are 10 other needs which are much more important to the customer. And then they are just not impressed by you solving one minor need of them, because all their attention is directed to solving their 10 most important needs, or maybe even just 3 important needs. So it's very important to find out which of these needs and hopes and gains and pains are how strong. And you should focus on the stronger ones, because people are not interested in solving all their problems. No one has time and money to solve all their problems. They typically want to solve your most urgent problems. So at the end, you need to find a problem which is worth solving. It should be important enough, it should be real, and you should get it right. And it's hard. So now the question is, how can you find that out? How can you explore the customer's needs? And here I present you 6 different ways you can do, and you should do all of them if possible. The first one is desk research. That's the easiest one, the most obvious one, the most comfortable one. You don't have to go out. You don't have to talk to people. You don't have to listen to people. You just sit on your computer and you Google around. So here, the goals are just to get enough information about the whole context, to see what is already known, to understand the landscape, to see how other people think about your customers, and just to find everything which is out there. Also to find objective data, right? If you have some assumptions, let's just check, is it true? Google is probably the main tool, but you can also use other sources, books, scientific papers, industry reports, other things. But you need to be aware of the limitations. Desk research is a necessity. You have to do a lot of it, but it's by far not sufficient, because often, you won't find information on the internet about what you exactly want. I mean, after all, you try to do something new, you have new questions, so obviously no one has ever written anything about those. Also, the problem is whatever you read has been written by someone else, has gone through the filter of their minds, and other people, can get wrong. So just because someone writes something, even a scientist writing a paper, they can get things wrong. So, you shouldn't trust other people's view of the world too much. You should get to your own view of the world. And there you're very limited in the internet, because you always see the world in the eyes of other people who have thought about the world and written about the world. And then also we have a lot of sources which are just not reliable. Either they have a political agenda, or they're just not good in quality. And it's certainly you need to train recognizing what are good sources and be critical about good sources. So be critical about the sources. Question whatever you read. The more it seems plausible, the more it seems like common wisdom, the more you should question them. After all, you want to come up with something new, so you need to question existing knowledge. And in the internet, obviously, you find existing knowledge, but you are the one who have to come up with new knowledge. You need to find things which no one else has found. But you have to do it. But it's not enough. A similar thing is expert interviews. You ask experts. That's people, who have been working in the industry for 20 years or who know a technology very well. And it's quite similar, but it's better because you ask a specific question, they answer to you, you can ask back. So it's a very efficient way to get a good overview on a topic, on an industry, on a problem. And you should do it. Sometimes it's hard to get access to experts, but try to have it. But you have the same limitation. An expert has his or her own view on the world, and that's not necessarily right. Even if someone is an expert, it doesn't mean that the people get everything right. And experts, they are very much biased by what has been successful in the past. That's their expertise. But maybe you want to come up with something new, and they might be very critical of it because they are biased, right? So really, you have to get closer to the customers. You have to talk to customers yourself. And the most prominent thing is customer interviews. You meet customers, you talk to them, you try to find out what they need, how they think, who they are. But it's very difficult to do that right. And it's very important that you don't start with online surveys. Sometimes I see people, when they start exploring the customers, they don't talk to the customers, but they set up online survey and send it to 150 people. And it looks good because, it's so representative. It's so many people. But initially, when you're exploring and you actually don't have a clue about the customers, it's not the right mean, because probably you won't ask the right questions. So for a long time, don't do surveys, but talk to people. And it doesn't have to be representative, but it must be deep and qualitative. And then you will start to feel the customer and learn about the customer. And maybe after having talked to 10 or 20 or 30 customers, you kind of start to have an idea of what's going on. And then you can, to get a more clear picture, also to have a quantitative picture, you can go into online surveys, but not before. So it's hard to do it right. And I think we have a problem. Jay, what should we do? I think we're already up with the time, right?
Yeah, it's 5:15, but it's okay. I mean, how much more time?
Either we do follow-up or yeah. So this is really important. Maybe, 50 more minutes, something like that.
Okay, yes, 15 more minutes.
Okay, sorry for that. I've just sampled that presentation, particularly for this webinar, so it's the first time I do it.
Okay. So anyway, I will share the questions to I'll share the entire slides to the audience who are registered for the webinar. So not an issue with that.
No.
Hello, can you hear us, Aaron?
Yes. Yeah.
So I'll share these presentations that you have shared with me with all the participants that are attending. Okay.
No problem. And I will send you the most recent version after the webinar.
Okay. Yes. I think it was a very nice insight.
I can't hear you very well now. Hello? Yes, that's my impression. I couldn't hear him for the last. But maybe we just wait until he comes back, because he should decide how we proceed, right? Otherwise, you know what? As long as he's not in, do you think we have connection to the participants? Can they hear us? Okay. You know what? I will continue for maybe 50 more minutes.
Yeah, hello.
Here he's back.
Yeah, sorry, it was a technical disconnection. Sorry.
No problem. We were just wondering, would it make sense that I do 50 more minutes and then I stop wherever I get? Because I'm getting to quite important part, this interview thing.
Yes, definitely. So
Is that okay?
You would like to continue for 2 more minutes?
Okay, sorry for that, but let me just do a few more slides.
Please.
Okay. So customer interviews, I think you know about that. Hopefully most of you have done it. The problem with customer interviews is it's not trivial to do it right. It's actually quite hard to do it right. And if you don't do it right, you waste your time and it won't help you a lot. So how to do customer interviews right? The most important thing, again, is attitude. If you don't have the right attitude, you won't be able to do good customer interviews. And their attitude should be about curiosity. You should be curious and open and really be interested in the customer. And typically, if you start a business, you're not, because you're really in love with your product. And for example, you're not curious to hear from any customer you talk to. You don't want to hear that they don't like it, because you like your product so much and you want confirmation, right? And if that's your attitude, you will conduct the interview such that you will get your confirmation. But probably you don't really learn about the customer, and probably you get it wrong. You will get the wrong confirmation. So being curious means being open to surprises, being open or keen on hearing things which you didn't know, which you didn't think of. To be keen on hearing disappointments. You thought that they would love it, and actually you hear that they don't. You should really be looking for disappointments. That's very hard. That's counterintuitive. That's not how our mind works. We want confirmation. We want positive feedback. We don't want to hear the truth. So you need to be curious and want to hear the truth. That's very hard. Also, one mistake which people often do is they ask people too narrowly. If you have a suitcase, they only ask them about the suitcases and traveling. And actually, you should ask people more broadly. Typically, they use the suitcase in a situation. Maybe it's about business, and maybe before they travel, they're at home. And what happens at home is also important. So try to get a broad picture about the whole person, around, of course, your product idea and what you want to address, but don't be too narrow. If you are too narrow talking to ladies and their shoes, you might miss the fact that they actually want to look elegant, because you have been asking so narrowly about the problem of being stuck in a gap. Only if you open up the discussion, you become curious about all other aspects of a person, then you start to discover important things which also are important for you. Very important. Don't be too narrow. And if you're curious for your customer, you will automatically be broad, because you're interested in the person and, not just your person buying your product. And automatically you will want to learn a lot about the person. A very common mistake is that people confuse the solution with the need. So sometimes people say something like, the customer need is they want stable suitcases. There's a big need among business travelers for stable suitcases. It sounds like a description of a need, but if you really think about it, it's a description of the solution. It's not a description of the need. So you describe your suitcase, you describe the product. But the need is something more fundamental. No one needs a suitcase. People, they want to travel, they want to take their stuff with them, maybe. And they don't want to carry heavy weights, they don't want to ruin their back, they have health needs. That's the real needs. So that's very important. And to be honest, it happens to the most experienced people, and it happens to me and other people, that they start talking about the product when they actually want to talk about the need. And that means you don't really think about the need, you don't really think about the customer. Try to learn not to sell. That's that's the same thing. When you have a great product idea, it's very hard to force yourself to be curious and to learn and not to fall into the salesperson's mode. Not to talk about your product such that people can't say anything else but, oh, great. And you can talk people into something, but it doesn't help you because you want to find out. You know? So don't talk too much. Most of the time when you spend in a country, you spend in a customer interview should be listening. If you talk too much, you don't do a good job. You won't learn much. You should talk 20%, you should listen 8%. Only you learn through listening. Don't judge. So try to not judge whether you like what they say or not. Try not to, if you hear something which you don't like, find explanations why that's probably wrong. Just try to listen and try to learn. And try to look for surprises. I always say if you spend 1 hour talking to a customer and you didn't hear any surprise, then probably you wasted your time. Probably you did something wrong. And sometimes, you send out students for talking to customers and they come back and you ask them, so what happened? What did you hear? And they say, it was great. They love it. And then I know, okay, it's probably something was wrong in the interview. Okay, key principles, start broad. Don't start explaining your product. Start, with question, who are you? What's your job? What's your family? Just try to understand the whole person. Don't point them to any certain direction. So they shouldn't know exactly what your product idea is. Of course, you have to tell them a little bit, otherwise they don't know why you're talking to them. Ask open questions, not questions which they can only answer with yes or no, or only with yes, but open questions. Ask concrete things. It's very good to ask people about the past. How did you do that then? How did you travel? Your last trip, think of your last trip. When was it? 1 week ago. Okay. How did you travel? How did you bring your goods? Did you have a suitcase? Instead of asking people, would you use a nice suitcase with a engine? That's too hypothetical. The answers become too unreliable, too unconcrete. You can trust real things more than hypothetical things. That's a technique. Ask people for examples. If they make statements, if they say, it's such a problem to travel with a big suitcase on train, that's nice, but ask them, okay, can you think of the last time when you encountered that problem? How was it? Tell me about it. When was it? Tell me the details. Examples, they reveal more truth than general statements. You should not have a fixed questionnaire. It's not a survey, but because you're open and you're open to surprises, you will maybe learn about topics which you didn't prepare for. And if you think it's interesting, continue talking about that. And maybe even you don't ask all the questions you wanted to ask, that's okay. But if you learn something interesting, which you didn't prepare for, that's the best thing which can happen. And one interview does not have to be comparable with the other. You don't do statistics. You don't do exact science. You explore. You try to get a picture of what you do. And these interviews work very well if it's like a natural conversation. If you have a sheet with questions and you ask one question after the other, that's not a conversation. The best thing is if it feels like just a natural conversation, taking its own rhythm, and then people feel safe, people feel relaxed, people feel open, and they start to tell you all kinds of things which you didn't ask them, but which could be very interesting, and you learn a lot. And typically, if you just listen to people, that's what's going to happen anyway. If you don't force them into the strict frame of your prepared questions. Typically, too much prepared questions, sticking too much to your script will kill a good conversation, and you will learn less. That's what I say, quality over quantity, deepness over breadth. You don't have to ask them everything, but try to really dig deep. And one really important question is why. So if they tell you something, often it's a good question to dig deeper, ask them, why is it like that? Why didn't you like that? Why were you angry at that situation? What exactly? Then they explain, and then you can ask why again. And with every why and every answer, you dig deeper, you get closer to the psychology of the person, more and more away from superficial things, and you get closer to really understanding the person. Of course, every person has biases. Every person has an agenda. So when you talk to people, they have their agenda, they have their biases. Try to understand it. You know, when you talk to an employee of a company, maybe the employee has certain issues with the boss, and that will influence the way how the person answers to you. So try to also critically reflect the context of the person, the context of his or her answers, and interpret the answers accordingly. Don't take everything just as straight as it is, but try to understand why that person might have come to that answer. And then, you know, you don't only talk to one customer. One customer is not enough to have a business, but you try to talk to many customers. And initially it's very confusing because you will realize every individual is different. Every person is different. But if you talk to 10 or 15 or 20 customers, you will hopefully start to discover patterns. You will see, okay, every customer is different, but, you know, I find 3 needs which seem to be there everywhere. Or you find something like, oh, actually, there are 2 types of people I've been talking. You know, there's one group who has these needs, and there's these other groups who seems to have these other needs. And then, of course, you have to think, okay, which group do I want to address? So that's what I mean by patterns. When you do that for a while, you start to understand, and the surprises become less and less. And after a certain point, you know, maybe you stop talking to them because you won't hear anything new. And you will have a very clear picture of what type of customers they are and which types has what needs. And then, okay, for a moment you can maybe stop, and then you can maybe do a survey and try to quantify how much of this, you know, custom type or the other custom type is there. Did I get it right, or did I just happen to find 20 very untypical customers and the majority is different? You can do your online things then, but not before. So you will automatically come up with hypotheses. You don't have to do anything. Your mind will automatically generate these hypotheses as you continue talking to customers. This is just a little checklist how to prepare for it. And obviously, one challenge you have as students is, you know, if you have a business for customers and maybe for students, it's easy. You just ask your friends and they are potential customers, that's fine. If you think of business to business, if you want to sell something to companies, to doctors or to agricultural companies, you know, it might not be so easy to talk to people from companies, you know, because they are very busy, and why should they talk to you? You're just a young, unexperienced student. But nevertheless, try. I mean, if you don't try to get in touch with companies, they won't talk to you. And actually, sometimes you will be surprised how easy it is to get an interview with the CEO of a local company around the corner. And, you know, there are different reasons. And one reason is, which I call the puppy effect. Kiddingly, of course, it's not very serious, but, you know, puppies, little dogs are very cute and everyone wants to pet them. And you're a little bit like puppies. You're still young, you're students. Obviously, you don't have 20 years of industry experience. But if you're keen and if you know, if people feel that you are really determined to build up a business and you're really curious, they will think, okay, that's such a nice thing. It's great to see young people being so, you know, active. And just because you want to help young people, you're willing to spend some time with them. Not always. Sometimes people are too busy, but that's actually just, you know, saying, I'm a student, you know, I have big dreams. Here I am. I need to learn. Do you have half an hour for me? Can open doors. And of course, you need to ask 10 people to maybe have 3 interviews. So many people will say no. That's okay. Just ask the next one. But if you don't ask many people, you will never get into companies. You will never get to your interviews. I think I need to stop. I have prepared significantly more, but time is up, right? So
I don't know if
you will get the slides, and maybe will be another opportunity to talk about other things later.
yes. But if time permits you, we are okay with still extension if you get
Yes, question. So I switch back. I unshare my screen, okay?
Okay. Fine.
Or actually, it doesn't matter because I don't see the people, but I can. Let me see the questions.
Okay. So the first question, Aaron, is asked by Mr. Rahul Parikh. Can you hear me, Aaron?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So Mr. Rahul Parikh is currently mentoring the student in the startups at the EDC of Padu University. And he's asking that, what do you think, how dynamics are going to be affected due to COVID, and which sectors will have more advantage for new entrants or startups?
Affected by what? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Yeah, it says that how our market dynamics are going to be affected after this COVID-19, the pandemic, and which sectors will have more advantage for the new startups?
You know what? I have no clue. I mean, obviously, that's the big question which every entrepreneur is thinking about right now, because we know big crises bring big opportunities. And each of us in his or her sector are currently trying to figure out, first, how can I survive in my business? And second, what are the great new opportunities in my sector? And I don't know. I know some things, but that's something, we all together, we are at the same level. We are all trying to figure it out. It would be interesting to have a conversation, also with the Indian perspective. I could say probably things which you already have been thinking of. So I think there's no point. I'm not. I don't have this wisdom. I don't think I know more than you guys know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We have another. We have another question from Vishal. He is basically a third-year engineering student. He is very keen in education sector. So he's asking that, since you are very experienced in the education sector, you already have a couple of startups in that. So particularly he's saying that most of the startups currently are working on edtech platforms. So supporting the students or education with the technological platforms. But there is a huge sector, particularly in India also, in the rural background, where the proper education, conventional education is not being imparted. So whether a youngster should focus on that part, or should focus on developing new tech tools and stuff. What do you think?
Okay, what are the two alternatives? Focus on, I didn't fully understand. Focus on which?
Yeah. So he's saying that right now, due to this distance learning and all, so people are more coming up with more educational tools, kind of tech tools that can support school educations, right? Particularly for middle class and higher upper class students. But he's saying that the quality of education in the rural area of the country, particularly in India, is not that good currently. So he's saying that as a youngster, as a young citizen of the country, where should exactly a student focus on? Whether he should focus on providing conventional education, good quality education for rural sector, or he should go on developing some tech tools for the schools, high quality schools.
Yeah, okay, I understand. That's a brilliant question. It's a very, very good question to ask yourself. And, he's right by observing that many people, there's a lot of startups in ed tech, online stuff, and you wonder why. And of course, one answer is, well, because now you can. And again, that reveals a bit a thinking from the technology and from the product side, because maybe you're a computer scientist and that's just a natural thing you could do. And that's why then you start up yet another edutech company. And that might be a bad reason because, as I said, you should focus on the customer, on the problem. And probably not all customer problems are best addressed with online tools or some edutech things, right? And sometimes you find a much better business opportunity if you don't do the fashionable thing and do what everybody right now does, but if you do something rather unconventional. So maybe doing something in a rural area without high tech, but just doing simple things like trying to build up better schools or try to establish a service which helps teachers in rural areas to become better teachers, or I don't know, I don't know anything about your market, might be less fashionable, but could be more effective. And also you have less competition because everyone is kind of competing with the similar type of things, so sometimes, and I'm a business angel, it's more a hobby, but I never invest into these very fashionable topics. I would never invest into any social platforms or blockchain or all these things which everyone does. And there's a simple reason, half of the world is doing that at the same time. The most clever people from everywhere in the world, from also emerging economies. You have very clever people in India, and they can also do blockchain. They can do it as good as they can do it, and in China and everywhere. So my chance of being one of those who really finds something which is a success as compared to all the other failures which will happen is very small, and I'm competing with all the clever guys trying to do a similar thing. Whereas if I go for something very boring, very unsexy, no one thinks of it. Like a friend of mine, he moved to Taiwan because his wife is from there, and he was working in that biotech company. He was a brilliant business person. I think he had a Harvard degree, And he said, I moved to Taiwan with my wife and to her family, and her father has a little business with screws, screws to screw parts together. And I was so surprised because it's so the country of this cool, high-tech, hype stuff. But probably, there are great opportunities in screws because mostly you don't have many clever people trying to do anything about that. And maybe it's being done the same way as people have been doing it in 20 years ago, just because no one bothers doing anything about screws. So in that sense, I would say sometimes the less hyped, less fashionable, more basic approach can actually, first of all, can have a bigger impact, on your country, and also can give you a better opportunity to become successful.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, for your comments. What do you think? I mean, here in India, Aaron, most of the schools, they have started teaching online, tech platforms. Do you really think that a kid who is in grade 4, 5, or maybe even first, second grade kid would really enjoy learning over live classes? What's your comment on that?
On online pitching?
The online lectures, for the school students particularly.
Well, I would say my own experience is the real thing is mostly better. Although surprisingly, sometimes I felt that I got closer to some of my students in this online Zoom setting than when they're sitting in the back row of the class, because they're closer. And also at the beginning, we were all very vulnerable and very confused and kind of shocked, and then you see the people in their living rooms, and somehow you get a more personal contact to people, which actually got me closer to students than the normal lecture situation. So it has two sides, but I think it's much easier to see what's going on, to interact, to ask little questions, to wake someone up. So I prefer real. By the way, I've been talking about customer interviews, and of course, all this is based on being very close to your customers, sitting together with the customer, feeling the customer, observing the customer, feeling subtle things. It's a big challenge, How do you do that now, as you cannot meet people? Of course, you do it by video, but it's less more. Your senses are less more. It reaches your senses much less. There are many things which you miss on video. So I think actually it's an important, interesting topic. How do you do good, customer interviews? How can you really be customer-centric in this age of video conferencing? That would be interesting to figure out. I have no answer. I just know I prefer to be with the customer, definitely, because, the next things on my slides were not only talking to them, but observing them, or even, getting into their shoes. So if you want to do something for farming, maybe work with farmers for 2 weeks. How you cannot do that on video. So this is a real challenge for customer-centric business development, to be honest.
Yeah, Aaron, we have one more question from Rakesh Prajapati, who is a professor at Mechanical Engineering Department of Harvard University. He's asking that normally, as an academician or as a mentor, the biggest challenge we face is that the students are not able to figure out a real startup opportunity, a real need that market requires. So, is there any basic procedure or kind of workshops or kind of arrangements wherein we can involve the students so that students could come up with a real need of people?
Yes, I think there are, but that's the things and I know it's use lean startup principles, use design thinking, stick to what I tried to tell you, those things. But also, I would say I'm as a professor or mentor, be careful. Be careful in judging the business ideas of the students. I mean, because sometimes you could also be wrong. So I think I rather try to encourage them, making progress, even if I think, the idea is not good. I ask critical questions, and then maybe they can answer it or not. And if they can't answer it, they will start to feel that maybe there's an issue. I try not to tell them that this is a bad idea. Because first, it's frustrating. Second, it doesn't initiate this search process. It's like wham, and then okay, they go home and are frustrated. And also, I might be wrong. So I try to help them to progress and to question and to, find their own hypothesis. Of course, often I have a clear opinion on it, right? I just try to guide them through the process wherever they are. They must find out themselves. Probably they won't believe me, right? If they're really enthusiastic, they will have to find out themselves. So from where they are, try to push them to the right direction, try to help them to ask the right question, try to inject some doubt into them. That's the most important thing.
So injecting doubt really plays an important role to understand the right correct. Yeah. So, Aaron, one of the questions, I would like to seek your views on this particular statement that we have heard many a times that entrepreneurs are born or made. So, what is your take on that? And do you think that there are any skill set that the student has who would be a successful entrepreneur? So that as a mentor, someone could pick those students and start working with them.
I'm not sure I understood the question. Is it about skills of students you need to have for being an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So are there any specific traits or qualities that a person has who could be a specific entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, I have a clear opinion on that. Typically when you hear about the entrepreneurial mindset or you read about successful entrepreneurs, often it's kind of the same type of person, right? Very visionary, very driven, intrinsically motivated, wanting to make a big impact, improve the world, things like that. And my clear opinion is that this, of course, people like that, they have a good chance to be good entrepreneurs. But if I just look at all the entrepreneurs, including myself, who have been successful, I think this is far too narrow. I think you can be become a successful entrepreneur with very different mindsets, with very different skill sets, with very different motivations as well. So I don't think that the only motivation which will lead you to success is wanting to improve the world, although it's a very powerful one. I've seen people whose only motivation was to make a lot of money, and they have been very successful. I might not like it, or people who have been driven by they need to get attention, to be admired. That's not purpose. That's not improving the world. It's an egoistic thing, but that has been driving them. Or I've seen people have been successful out of desperation because they had a personality which made them very hard to employ. They couldn't be employed, or if they're employed, they lose the job after 3 weeks. So the only option they had is to do something for themselves. It was not for improving the world, but it's a strong force. So I think there is a lot of different possible motivations. Many people just do it because they don't like to have a boss which commands them around. Again, that's not improving the world. It's something about your lifestyle, but it's a very strong, very good reason. So I think there are many different motivations or combinations of motivations. Sometimes it's playing. For me, that was very important. For me, starting up a company is like in the old time playing in the sandbox, just the same feeling. It's fun. It's not so much about improving the world, again. And also in terms of skill sets, I think you need to have I think there are some skill sets which you need to have or develop. I think you need to be able to deal with ambiguity and with risk, but that's something you can learn. Very honestly, when I started, I was not very good at that. I was an engineer. I like to be on the safe side. Yeah, I was taught to be on the safe side, to be under control. And starting a company means you start walking while you don't even know where the path is and how it will continue. You need to get used to that. And I learned that. It's not killing me. And actually, you always find some ways, even if you don't know what the ways are at the beginning. So certain things you can learn, right? But you need to have some motivation, and there's a big range of possible motivations. And then you can learn courage and confidence and these. I think the most important thing is that you must have a reason why you want it. You must be driven for some reason to do it. Otherwise, it's too hard. It's not the easiest way. So without a strong motivation, whatever that is, probably there's easier way to be happy, right? That's the most important thing. And I think then also a lot is also you can learn from these techniques. It's a method. Partly it's a method. So I think, yes, there are, of course, people who are more gifted and have the better personality to be an entrepreneur than others. But actually, I think many very different people can become successful entrepreneurs. And I would never discourage anyone who I feel wants to become one just because I think that's not the right skill set. I would never do that. Because how do I know?
Yeah. So, Aaron, I will take one last question because it's almost close to 2 hours. I'm thankful to you for your time with us. We have last question from one of the very enthusiastic founder. He is Mr. Saurabh. And Saurabh is a student of Parle University and currently is the founder of Rega Cloud. And what he's doing in startup is he has an e-commerce company and trying to sell the gift products, handicrafts within the country and pop culture kind of things. So he's asking that how does e-commerce companies work in Europe? Is it different to what it does in India?
Sorry, what does e-commerce different from what?
Yeah. How is e-commerce companies working in Europe?
To be honest, I can't answer the question because I don't understand sufficiently how e-commerce companies are working in India. So without understanding India, I couldn't tell you what the differences are. I would probably naively assume that the differences are not that great, but probably that's wrong. I mean, in terms of what, I could, of course, try to say something about e-commerce companies in Switzerland. I know what I know is that they are really a very tough competition to conventional retail, be it clothes or be it electronics or anything. So we see a lot of very well-established retail brands disappearing right now.
Okay.
Because people are just not. And those who try to survive, they basically say, we need to really differentiate and become an experience or an event or something. Otherwise, there's no point. So it's very successful in Europe, that I know.
Yeah. So Aaron, as you said, e-commerce is disappearing the retail stores and so. So do you think somehow it is affecting people losing their job actually coming up with a startup like this?
Of course, yes. I mean, a few weeks ago, a big department store closed down in the middle of Zurich, and everyone who had been working there lost their jobs.
Oh.
That's true. But of course, on the other hand, it creates new jobs, right? So that's always been like that. Since we have progress, since we have innovation, since we have technology, that's the process of that. Some people, when people stopped using steam engines, steam trains, the people who was filling the coal into they didn't have a job anymore, right? So in some way, progress is very painful for some people who are in the middle of it, right? Whether I believe that overall we will have less jobs, net effect less, you might have the feeling because more and more things are automated and computers do things autonomously and things become more efficiently and robots do the job. But just from history, I'm a person who doesn't believe that. I'm actually optimistic that there will, whatever progress we have, whatever automation we have, there will be new fields where, people and labor are needed. That's what happened in the last 200 years since industrialization. And so many times people said, okay, there won't be any jobs anymore because now machines are weaving the carpets. And yes, people lost their jobs, but then completely new jobs were invented. So I'm optimistic, but I realize that for some people this is really tough. Older people whose profession disappears, what do they do? Can you retrain them? Maybe, but it's tough.
So I think we should end the session here. We have a lot more questions coming up, but anyway, Aaron will be there with us in another workshop as well. So hopefully we could take it up during that interaction. So thank you so much, Aaron sir, for sharing your views on customer-centric business creation. And I'm very much sure that this session and insights that you have provided today in this webinar, expanding from 2 hours, would really help the young founders to figure it out what exactly they need to do now, because most of them would now maybe plan their interviews with the customer, and the details that you share with them will definitely help them to figure out.
So we'll have, okay. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. It was a great pleasure. Unfortunately, I didn't see any of the participants. It would have been a much greater pleasure to get a feeling of you guys. And sorry for my bad time management. I kind of almost knew when I started, but one problem of entrepreneurs is they're all overly optimistic. And I was optimistic that somehow I get this done in the time, and of course, didn't work out. So sorry for that, taking more time than scheduled.
Aaron, last suggestion from your side, some kind of key learning lessons from your entire journey so far. So you have been an innovator, you have been an engineer, you have been building up few startups, and now you are into angels, investing with the startups, right? So, and the data professors also, and you are mentoring the startups. So, can you suggest some few key lessons that you would like to suggest to the young students that they should take care of from your entire life?
I couldn't give you the one key lesson. Maybe I would have to think about it. There's a lot of key lessons. There's one on the last slide of my presentation, and it's coming back to something I already showed before. It says something like, stay doubtful and confident.
Okay.
I think that's an important one, really important one. You need the confidence to go on, and you need the doubt to quickly progress. And that's not trivial, and not everyone has fully understood that. So maybe that, but
Yeah. So thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing your views and